Let me share my screen. So, hi everyone. My name is Kitty. I'm a director in our digital strategy team at Rangle.io. Today, I'm going to be here presenting with Jenna, who is, Jenna, do you want to introduce yourself? It's better than I do it.
Hi, my name is Jenna. I'm a strategist at Rangle. My background is in psychiatric research. I completed my PhD at the University of Toronto 2 years ago.
And we're also going to have Mike joining us a little bit later, who is the VP of Product and Transformation at Rangle. So because there are quite some new people in the group, let me just very quickly just introduce, who is Rangle and what's our ground to even talk here today. And after that, we actually move on to the actual subject. So Rangle is a Toronto-based scaled experience engineering company. We advise, build, and coach our clients, and basically we build products and platforms with superior customer experiences. That's really where we are good at, like the experience part of things. And we actually hold meetups super close to our heart. We were founded at a meetup, an Angular meetup, 8 years ago. So, we've always been part of the community, giving back to the community, learning from the community. So we love that kind of, very informal conversations and brainstormings with other like-minded people. We are working with well-funded, high potential startups, scale-ups, but also proper global companies. We also have an office in Europe, so we really can also service, and we do service global clientele as well. So we do a lot of business in the US, quite some business in Asia as well. So, we are just a very entrepreneurial company from that perspective. So we mainly focusing on 3 different industries, banking, retail, and healthcare. And basically how we started with health was, we started to get some projects. We were a modern front-end developer company, and then slowly we transitioned into product management and experience design and, doing advisory, etc. But we really started with technology. That was our core. And then we worked with some healthcare companies. One of the most famous projects that we've done is the HIMSS website, telehealth. We've done, we developed actually a software in medical device for a neurosurgical company, Synaptive. We created AI-driven infant learning for Bubbly. We are working currently together with Sanofi. So, we do a lot of work in healthcare and with healthcare companies. And basically, we saw a trend kind of emerging a few years ago. We started to work with some global pharmaceuticals, some we can name, some we cannot name. And we started to work and build software as medical devices for them. And that was at the time relatively new for us. We are an engineering company, so, we are not regulators. However, we had to basically, be successful in that environment as well. So we learned a lot by doing, and we thought it's such an amazing opportunity to see, how you can, if we truly accelerate medical outcomes through digital products, and it has so many ins and outs and interesting challenges, and there are specific challenges. Why not share that with the larger community? So basically, we created a knowledge hub on our website, which is free of charge. It's there. Everybody can look at it. It's our POV of how we see software as medical device, what we have learned by building software as medical device. And we put it out there, and we try to really publish new articles every week, every 2 weeks, as much as we can. But we thought it was very, very theoretical. We try to add a few case studies in there just to bring it to life. For example, we built one of the first, not one of, but the first CE certified React Native app in the world. So, we have quite a longer case study on that to explain that, like what we did and why we did it. And, we developed a kind of a point of view called compliance by design, like how we brought our agile principles into regulatory and compliancy. So we are trying to like share as much as possible, because we really just believe that knowledge is for everybody, and we put it out there so others can make it better and we can learn from them, and that's how we kind of grow. So we thought, just to make sure that it's not just sending information, but we also are being inspired and we are also learning. We are going to create a community around it. We're going to organize a series of meetups where every single time we kind of dive into one specific element of the software as a medical device market. And we are really trying to create something very proactive, a true community, and every time just look at something else. So we don't always necessarily have to talk, we would like to also later on invite some other people to talk about regulations, and maybe if the community is interested in funding, let's invite some investors to have a conversation with them. But we are just getting started. So obviously right now it's still about just, hey, is there even enough interest in this community? So last time, about a month ago, we did the first meetup, and that was really about introduction to SAMD. So what is software as a medical device, what it is not. We looked at a lot of examples. We did, some conversations around it. We looked at the different, on high level, the different classifications that are out there in the US and in Europe. And today we are actually going to look at product management for SAMD devices, and how to basically find product, not just product market fit, but product regulatory market fit. And we thought that is interesting for two perspectives. One is that whoever is familiar with agile product development, they will have the new information on how to do that in the SAMD market. And whoever is familiar with the healthcare or SAMD, they will get introduced how to do agile product management in that environment. So we hope with that we fill in some gaps, and we can actually show something interesting for everybody. Is there any questions before I get started on the content? No. Then let's go further. So product management, what is that? So it's an organizational function that truly guides every single step of the product lifecycle. So, from the development, through the classifications, through the pricing, through the product marketing, basically the product manager does a little bit of everything and overviews the entire process, and make sure that the product and the customer are kept as number one priority throughout the entire process. So how do we do that? We are at Rangle are truly agile, and I know a lot of companies say that, but we are truly to the core agile. So we really do product management in that way as well, which means that we do a traction first approach to product management, which means that it's not always about being first to the market, but driving traction, being first to market adoption. So when we are scoping the products and we are creating go-to-market strategies for products, we are truly looking into how we can drive traction, how we can drive people coming back and using the product, and how we can prove, and find actual tangible evidence for the working business model. In an agile fashion, we do minimal viable products. So that's true. That means like we validate the product market fit through, like very early on, and through releasing a smaller version of the application that contains the most important features, that test the very basic hypothesis for the product. And we test it, through user behavior. So instead of doing interviews around it, etc., we really try to give it to people, let them use it and test it. Obviously, this is a little bit more difficult in a SAMD market. So that's something that we are going to double down on in a minute. We do product management in an agile way. So we really optimize for speed to market. And, and we do continuous delivery of value. So we are really trying to make sure that we are continuously iterating on the software, and we are releasing value every second week. And also with all this together, we tackle basically big risks early on. We tackle the value risk, whether or not the product actually adds value to the customers, the business risks, whether or not they are willing to pay for it. And, we can become like a proper for-profit company, feasibility risk and usability risks as well. So why do we use this product management format? Is because we want to get not just product market fit as in a normal digital world, but product market regulatory fit in the most efficient and effective way. And that is truly the essence of it. We have to make sure we basically reduce that pre-planning part, that is usually like very well known to the healthcare market, like a lot of perfect planning, testing, etc. before we release something. We have to make sure we adhere to all the regulatory requirements. However, we kind of reduce it as much as possible so we can start growing, in an agile way with the product. So what is product management? So this is really the four capabilities that product management kind of touches upon: UX, tech, business, and regulatory. So the product manager is not somebody who is the best of all four, but product manager is definitely somebody who needs to understand all those four and needs to kind of manage those processes and make some decisions with the right counterparties, right? Another important thing just to note is that product management is not something that you do when you're building a product and then it stops, but it is truly across the product lifecycle. And I know it makes sense, and everybody always says it, but most organizations forget about it. They launch something and then they leave it, right? There are very, very different capabilities needed in an introduction phase of a product than in a growth phase. Growth phase is a lot more about product marketing, growth hacking. It's a lot more about how you balance your growth. The maturity is all about how you can reinvent the wheel and add new features and grow for other kind of target audiences. So there is like very, very, very different capabilities needed in all of those. The product strategies are very different. The product frameworks you're using is very different. So we really need to make sure that whenever you or your organization is building a product, you're paying proper attention in which phase your product is in right now and where you are, what's the next one coming up. And then traditional versus agile product management. So, traditional product management, and product development is all about a lot of upfront work and then doing everything at the same time, and then doing all the compliance and testing and quality assurance, and then launching, right? A big bang launch. Now, we don't do that, in Agile. At least we are trying in SEMD, we try to do that as iterative as possible. So we try to do the development process iteratively. We also try to do the compliance iteratively. So we really do work with collaborative teams where it's not just a Scrum team, but we also have, regulatory professionals, QAs, quality assurance people as part of the team. And we take them along the way, and it's a truly collaborative process and not a stopgate process. So that's a huge basic difference between how you plan. Also, in terms of product characteristics, in traditional product management, you kind of figure out the perfect product, and like it includes all kinds of feature sets and it's big and great. But in Agile product management, you're really focusing on the most important feature first, the most important product characteristics that will set your product aside, that is your unique selling point, that is the big, innovation on the market. That's the first thing you focus on, and instead of building all the rest out there, you test that first. And if it doesn't fail, if people want it, it works, it's feasible, and there's enough demand in it, then you grow out into the next things. And the other huge difference is the customer involvement. In traditional product management, you mainly interact with the customers in the requirements gathering phase. And in Agile product management, you involve them throughout the whole process. Now, again, that's a lot easier to say than to do in a SMD market, because there will be a bunch of regulations how you can interact with potential patients. But it is possible. At the end of the day, it's just truly that like mindset, how you go in there, right? And those will make a huge difference in the product development process. Let me stop here for a second. Do you have any questions about what I have told so far? I know it's super high level. We're gonna go into the nitty-gritty detail in a second.
Yeah, and maybe you're going to get into this later, Kitty. So I'm in the field of data analytics, and I'm kind of familiar with Agile. I'm primarily interested in why it's so hard to do in a regulated environment, especially when you have machine learning models and things like that.
Yeah.
I'd like to understand, I understand the intent of regulation, so you have well-documented clinical trials and you submit, stuff to FDA or whatever the regulatory authority is. But when you have software, especially like machine learning software, you get real feedback from the real world. And I'm not sure what part of that needs to still be manual and, humans reviewing documents and all that. So long-winded question, but I hope it makes sense.
Absolutely. So I think we're going to touch upon that in the next section, but why it's a little bit more challenging to be Agile in this environment. And I think the best person to actually talk to that is William in this audience, who is our VP of technology, and has tremendous experience in this market. Is that because yes, you have, machine learning and that collects data, but you need to still pass all kinds of regulatory requirements. You need to get the different classifications that needs to fit. If you work for a larger organization, that needs to fit within the quality management system of that organization. Also, it's regulated as well how you can interact with patients. Even in a POC, a proof of concept phase, even you cannot just go out and interview patients, right? Everything is regulated to make sure, we are keeping patients safe. So data collection is usually not an issue, but actually what you can do with the collected data and then how you can add value with it back to the user, that part is very much regulated. So those are when it's not difficult, but it's time consuming and you need to know the ins and outs of that. It's absolutely possible. We've done that as well, but it's definitely something additional to normal or other digital product development processes.
Kitty, this is Sunil. Can I just add to that, if I may?
Yeah, of course, please. It's a community.
Thank you. So my background is in regulatory. The short answer is that with Agile, with continuous machine learning, you have a continuously evolving product. That's not the way that the regulators work. They will register a product one at a time because they will consider the data in terms of the benefit and the risks of the product, and they will place that product in the market for the use of patients. If you have another product which has been iterated, that will need another subsequent submission and an approval. And so the timelines where you agilely iterate product doesn't match the regulatory timelines for submission, review, approval. So there's a disconnect. Now, there are attempts by the regulators to try and think through what a regulatory regime might look like, which will continuously approve an evolving system. But they're not there yet. So that's part of the issue, is that the ability to iterate agilely is much, much greater than the regulators' review and approval timelines. That's part of the answer.
Yeah,
So,
thank you very much.
Yeah,
So maybe just one quick follow-up and then I'll shut up because I want to listen to the content. So, I mean, I get it, right? So you can treat software like a molecule and do human clinical trials, and it's the standard regime. I guess my question was, you're missing out on the opportunity that you get more model feedback and real world data, and you can still create a bunch of paperwork and give it to FDA, which is fine. I was trying to figure out, like, the whole data collection and model performance can be automated.
Sure,
model metrics can be automated. So what is a human being going to look at to say, well, this is good or not? Unless you're doing a new clinical trial or something, I understand. But forgive me, I'm not a biologist or a chemist. I'm a software developer. So.
Yeah, no. So I think it's not about, again, what I said before, like, it's not about like the data collection. I think that is, like, yes, you can do that. And then you can look at significance, within the findings. But after that, to actually have it acknowledged as, by the FDA or any kind of regulatory other bodies, as a, like a new evidence for like a new clinical evidence, that's kind of the process that takes a long time, because basically what you're doing is you might be replacing some old hypothesis, and that just needs to go through the regulatory life cycle, and and that takes a long time. So it's not difficult per se, but it has the potential to significantly slower your process, to be able to do something with the data, to be able to, build a new solution, with that data. And that's where you actually add value to the patients, right?
Makes sense. Thanks. Yeah.
No worries. So let's look at the product management process. So what we did here for you guys, we kind of mapped out the main steps of what a product manager needs to think of in the introduction and the growth stages. Okay, so we didn't go into maturity and decline because that's a whole other conversation. But usually most people that we talk to are really like, hey, I have an idea. I want to, how do I build that? How do I put that on a market? Or they are already building something, but they are stuck, or, or they have a need, but they don't know what's the good solution for that is, and they want to kind of work with that, and so we kind of try to map it out. I'm gonna talk to that, but one thing just to say, it is not this easy and exclusive. Like, there are a lot of things that needs to happen at the same time, so these are just like the main elements for the sake of like helping with some kind of visualization. You will get access to the board, feel free to use it, but probably there are another 100 little side steps that we could have added to it, or add at this working in the same time. Just wanted to give that disclosure in the beginning. So first phase, if you have absolutely nothing, and I don't care if you're a startup or or work at a big company, you need to validate a problem solution fit. And this is something that most organizations take very lightly. Most organizations start with product ideation. I have an amazing idea. We're going to build this app that's going to use like AI and this and that, and it's going to be fantastic. And, we just ask people to pay €4 when they download the app, or we're going to have a freemium version in there. That's usually the kind of, level of thought that we get from a lot of organizations. And what we always try to do is to bring them back to to the very first step and really do a proper validation of problem solution fit. And what it means is that, you need to identify the problem space, and you can do that. Sometimes if you're working in that, area, or you just have some people suffering from a chronic disease in your network, you are just familiar with it, but you have to do brainstormings, what is actually at hand. You can do data mining, look at market analysis, what's out there. You can use frameworks like 5 Whys, to kind of really get to the root cause of the issues. But basically, you really need to define a very clear problem space that you will try to solve for. Then you need to go and identify the need. And the need is all about understanding who will be your target customer, and, and do secondary research on their needs and their available products right now and whatever they are using. And another kind of common mistakes that we see here is that people say, like, I had this customer once said, we're gonna do pre-diabetics, and type 2 diabetics. And I was like, okay, those to me sound two very different customer group. They might have different needs, right? So understand your customers, to do the consumer discovery. And this is a lot, again, easier to be said than done. There are a lot of different ways how you do consumer discovery. Some of you who are involved in design know that, you can do customer personas or product personas, customer journey mapping, which are all great and fun, but those are still very theoretical, right? So what we believe in at Rangle is that you always have to increase your proximity to the customer as much as possible. So nothing beats an interview, right? Nothing beats, we love the framework jobs to be done. It is basically another way to look at customer personas and motivation for using different solutions on the market. Happy to send you a bunch of content on it. We have a bunch of articles on it as well on our website. But that also includes a bunch of interviews and actually talking to people. What's their day-to-day frustration? What is their true need? Not the need that you want them to have, or what the need that is on the surface, but where their true underlying need, and what do they have capacity for? Because you can create the best app, but if they don't have capacity to spend that much time on it, or they're just not motivated enough to use it, or the current solutions that are on the market are worse, but they are okay, they do a good job, you might not have a competitive advantage enough to actually convert them over to your solution. So you really need to understand the problem space first before you get to solutioning. And again, most organizations and most people start with, hey, I have this amazing idea. And that's fantastic. Keep that energy, but don't forget to come back and clarify it, first with the problem space. And then you get to the product ideation, right? And that's like a bunch of brainstorming, and you need to do proper product vision and product opportunity assessment, right? Within the larger competition scale. And one thing that I truly, from the bottom of my heart, advise is to do a North Star metric workshop. And North Star metric is the one single metric that will tell you whether or not you are successful with your project or product. So, and that is a lot easier to be said than done. It's not the number of downloads, it's like the true value you are driving with your product. And the most successful companies out there today, digital companies, like for example, Netflix, they do have that. And every time you look at their North Star metric, it's something very, very different than what you would expect. And, they nail it down, those nuances. So, do that work. And after that, do the business model discovery. It's amazing to have a great idea. I see so many people doing fantastic job securing funding, but they actually haven't thought about the business model. And yes, do the canvas and do the competition, but look at on a high level already some pricing elements, because if your product needs to go through a whole new validation cycle, an FDA validation cycle, and it's going to cost you 2 million euros, you will need to you need a lot of people to download an app to get that paid back, right? And it takes you a long time. So it's super, super important to figure out smart business models, dual business models, not just per se from customers, but like who can you work together with in a partnership, what kind of sponsors you can get, where can you get a funding from, so it's really work it out where you're going to have the money. And I know it sounds very easy. Again, just another example. Once there was this company who reached out to us for an RFP, and they had this amazing idea for an app for pre-diabetics. And they were like, yeah, we're going to have like this freemium model. And they immediately hired a company to create some, look and feel for the functionalities, like, just like 6 or 10 screenshots of the app. And they went all through all that, and they were like, so can you build this for us? And how much is it going to cost? And I was like, no, let's take a step back. You haven't validated your idea. You haven't validated your problem space. You have some understanding, but you don't have a business model. We can build that for you, but then I'm telling you right now, you're going to fail. Like, you need to figure those things out before you go into building if you want to make it, right? So this is not something that's specific for SAMD. This is something that's specific for all digital products. And I know it makes sense, but most of the times organizations wildly underestimate it and skip this, right?
Can I just add something really quickly?
Sure.
It could be also like, let's say you're developing a SAMD within an enterprise, and the goal here isn't to generate revenue from that SAMD that you're developing. So you could think that the business model here is irrelevant because you're not trying to profit from it. But another aspect that is really key to business model discovery is it's not just about generating revenue or how are you going to profit from this enterprise, but it's actually about, if let's say you work for a large enterprise and they're funding this project and they gave you the green light, how are you going to demonstrate value that in some way that they continue to fund that project, right? And so it's not just about how are you making money, but it's about how do you measure and how you're going to set up the infrastructure to be able to capture that value and show it to your stakeholders so that they don't kill your project and that it continues to, you show impact. So it's not just about money, but it's about impact and value too.
Yeah, perfect addition. Thank you, Jana. Another step that is often skipped is validating the idea. Most people will jump from here to securing funding. Like, hey, I have the idea. Here's the need. Here's how we're gonna, demonstrate how we're gonna deliver value, and then they immediately go for the funding. Actually validating the problem solution fit is super important, right? And you can do that in a lot of different ways. And, it might feel a bit scrappy for folks working at large organizations, but you could create just a product landing page. Like, hear me out. You create a product landing page, you put out what the product is about, and you do heavy marketing, analytics on it. Like, you just like do some Google Analytics, you do a LinkedIn campaign on it. Let's see what kind of traction it's getting. Are people following? Are people subscribing for it? Let's just like, measure what's the kind of, like, if you put, let's say, $2,000 on it, into it, how much traction you're going to get. It's a really interesting thing to validate that idea, if that resonates. If you can already in that super early stage, when you have nothing, just the idea, you can find people who are actually interested in it, right? If you don't find nobody reacts to it, then, then should you even go further with that? If you cannot create a little bit of traction, at least. You can interview with early adopters, testers. You don't necessarily have to do that in a clinical, format yet. You can do it guerrilla style, but just still talk to people, talk to patients, talk to people who have that issue. You can even create a crowdfunding site, not per se to actually raise the money, but just to see how much interest is there, how much is it community driven, how much community needs that, right? So you want some form of validation of your idea, some kind of early on traction. And that really comes back to the traction first approach that I mentioned in the beginning. So you know that it's not just an idea that you as a CEO, product manager, like head of technology or whatever your role might be, it's not just something that you love, but other than somebody that also loves the idea and wants it and, has interest in it. And then you go into securing the funding, right? And for that, you will need to show some kind of business case. You will need to come up with some kind of pricing model. You need to do a bunch of investor meetings. And it's, again, very different if you do that internally or if you do that with, investment firms. But, both will ask for those KPIs, those early traction. And if you have that, it's going to be a lot easier conversation. So that's the first phase. And again, most organizations skip and just only focus on that. But let's suppose that you did all that, then you get into this one. And that's validating the product regulatory market fit. And that's the extra thing in digital product development, other than SAMD market, you have, just product market fit, which is already a very, very difficult thing to do. And most organizations fail miserably with that. And at SAMD, you also have to have a regulatory fit on top of that. So we will explain you how to do that, or at least what are the steps that you should be taking, what we advise you to take. So, everything started with, product strategy and doing a product discovery workshop. And that's really when you map out the features, and the feature sets are like truly not just the value-added features, but also features that do I want a single sign on, do I want to log in? Do I want, what kind of privacy pages do I need to add to it? What kind of, all those kind of relatively boring pages as well that you have to do a proper feature mapping workshop. And at this stage, dream big, go big. We want all these features, and all the ideas are up in there, and can we make it can we envision a coherent product? And for that, you do a bunch of feature research, you do feature descriptions. What does that feature do? How does it add value? Why it is needed in an app? Based on that, you can sketch out some kind of high-level tech and data infrastructure to understand that, okay, if this is the future plan that, whether we want the app to, or the digital product to kind of grow into, this is the kind of infrastructure that we need to put in place at the end. This is where we start, right? Same from a data perspective side, you will have to design for the very end point. So to make sure that, you will be able to develop something that's scalable, that will scale for your future ideas, but you will need to start small. Then when you have all those product features, you will need to look at what is the clinical validation requirements for those features. Are those something that you can do without clinical validation? Are those something that require clinical validation? And if it requires clinical validation, is there already an established clinical association? So basically, is there already something else like that on the market, or a clinical study that has been approved that you can piggyback on? Or do you need to do the clinical validation by yourself? So right now, I will take you through what happens if there is already something out there. So is the best case scenario, basically, that saves you many, many years and many, many millions of dollars. Okay. So when there is already something there that proves that, yes, this approach that you're trying to digitize works, and then you don't have to do your own clinical study. Okay. So I'll take you through that, and then we come back and then we look at what happens if that's not the case. So there is a well-established clinical association. So most large organizations will ask you to build a POC. And a POC is short for proof of concept. And basically a proof of concept is a small feasibility project. It's truly to build something and show that this is, the idea that you have for the product is feasible from a technological and value perspective. And it will create some user feedback. And this is something that, usually you will be able to present at some internal medical affairs boards if you work at a larger organizations, or the investors, that, hey, I have this POC, I prove that this can be done. So an example for that is, for example, we built an application that it's an app that you can take a picture of a test strip, and then basically it will read all the data on the test strip, and you can see it in an app, and then you can connect it with a blood glucose monitoring device, and you can see it in an app, what's your blood glucose level, right? Originally, it was done, with external softwares. Now we can do it in a mobile phone. Fantastic idea, but first you need to really make sure that the image recognition, is something that works. It works well enough, to pass the thresholds, right? So that's really something, instead of before you would put a bunch of time into the whole product and all the other kind of elements around it, and styling and design and user flows, you actually just want to be able to test that feasibility, right? So that's what you do with a POC. If that POC is ready, then actually you can build a prototype. And so POC tells you that, hey, it's possible to build it, and a prototype will show you how you will build it, right? So this is really where you prototype the most important feature or a main end-to-end journey in your application, and where you really look at, you look at navigation, you look at flow, you already took in some accessibility considerations in there. So this is really where UX designers come in, and you look at exactly like how it's going to work, right? And this can be still a low fidelity or a mid fidelity prototype. It doesn't have to be all in colors and everything, but it just helps you with the UX flow, and it will help you actually scope your MVP and see that, do we really need that functionality in there? Is that really something that we can leave out for the minimum viable product? So it will have a lot of conversations. It will also, again, help for people to maybe test some of the hypotheses with, or investors to, if you haven't secured all the investors yet, to show something very tangible for them in their hands, and then they can you can raise more money, you can get more buy-in within your organization. That being said, oftentimes, so in large organizations, usually you do walk through that POC, prototype, and MVP process. In smaller startups, when, usually you actually skip POC, or sometimes this POC/prototype kind of merges together as one step. But, just again, to know that those are two different distinctive steps, and they do have a very different aim. This is to test feasibility. This is to test how you are going to actually do that. So then you get to the scoping of the MVP, and it's something that I learned. So MVP stands for minimum viable product. So a product that is, the leanest cut of your large, amazing product idea. So you can put something relatively quickly on the market, but it's viable. So it will test your value, that you deliver enough value to the customer, and it will test if you can, your business viability as well. So that's the viable in there. In Europe, I just learned, like it's not really common in North America, but we oftentimes call it minimum lovable product, just to make sure, because a lot of organizations make the mistake is that they cut the product so lean that actually they take everything lovable out of it. And basically it won't be enough to attract people. So that traction won't be there. You will be first to launch something, but it won't be lovable by the people. And, so you really need to make sure, and it's a very delicate product management strategy of what do I scope in, what do I keep in the minimum viable product that's like still shows that, you know, my product is different. It has a unique selling point. It has, you know, it's something unique, but without having to do a bunch of development work on it. Another very important thing that most people make as a mistake is that they just say, okay, so we're going to do this minimum viable product, that these will be the features, and that's it. And the right way of doing that is you come up with hypotheses. What do you want to test? Right? So you have to first know, what do I want to test with the product, so I can choose which features do I scope in within my minimal viable product scope. So definitely, please don't forget the hypothesis. And after that, you know, you can do the feature scoping and slicing, and you can do feature estimations and prioritizations. You can, you know, build on the acceptance criteria for the features, just to make sure everybody truly understand what it is part of the minimum viable product and what it is not part of the minimum viable product, which are very, very important. Also, after that, you kind of go into product delivery planning. And that's really when you look at it like, all right, so I understand the need. I have some budget. I have worked out. We know that we can build this. We have a basic understanding how we want the flow to be. We understand what are the most important features and, you know, will be, and what kind of hypothesis we are going to be building with it. So we also understand what kind of data do we need to collect with the MVP. So now I will need to look at, do I have the resources and the capabilities within my team? If not, you know, I need to look at how do I hire it? How do I work together with other companies? For example, have I ever done this? If not, maybe I need to partner with a regulatory advisory organization. If I don't have good data people, maybe I want to partner or buy in or hire some data analytics people. So you really have to look at what are the capabilities and resources needed for your product. And in this step, you also look at the outcome-based roadmaps that you build, some story mapping, prioritize backlog. So it's really getting into the more practical elements of, you know, of like a tactical elements of what actually needs to be done. Then basically you have a good plan, you have something that you can show, and you have like the, you know, like this is how much is it gonna cost, and this is what I need. So you can go again to your stakeholders, they can approve the budget, they can approve the vendors. That's where you want an RFP kind of process usually. And then if that's all gone well, then you build an MVP. And please look at it here, build an MVP is one single step. And we all know that it is a lot more. It's you know, it's the heart of the whole thing. We were really much thinking about maybe the next meetup, actually doubling down on this one, how you actually build from a more software engineering perspective and, you know, UX engineering perspective, how you build the MVP. So I'm not going to double down on it a lot, but just some things that you need to consider here is the product design, both from a UX and a UI perspective, accessibility optimization, like, and this can be also very big. Like one time, I was part of a project where we were designing a product for patients with spasticity. So, you know, that means that, you know, how we look at the product UX and UI is majorly influence, you know, like the buttons will be bigger. It has to be super lean. There cannot be a lot of buttons on an app, you know, like it's just like such a fundamental part of it. So you really need to take that into consideration. You need to do the software development. You need obviously good software engineers, but also you need to have the right kind of software engineers in order to make the technological choices. You need to have quality assurance people on time. You need to have data management, you know, data analytics, business analytics people. You need to really make sure you build in all the product metrics that you will need to measure when you launch the product, so you can get the right insights of the usability. You need to have delivery metrics, and you need to have compliance. And that's what we said with the collaborative team. You really need to have all those people in one coherent, collaborative team working together from day one, and not just, involve quality and compliance at the very end, if you want to build something truly scalable on the long term. So while you build MVP, you really need to make sure that you're adhering to all regulatory and compliance classifications. You build the product in a way and the code in a way that, you can come back to it if, regulations change or new features are added in the future. You need to make sure that, you kind of continuously building all those documentations that are needed. In your software development process, basically the requirements are part of your user stories. Okay, so you need to make sure that that's really working all the time. And then, obviously you send all the documents at the very end for the application, which is fantastic. And at the same time, you will need to start planning your go-to-market. And that's another thing that is wildly underestimated. Most people think like, and we have an app and we launch it and it's going to be great. And no, most organizations that we see fail at here. They somehow get together the whole thing. Probably this regulatory and compliance takes longer than they expected. Even if they burn more money, they still hold on to it, and then they feel here at the very end of this product market regulatory fit. There's very few organizations that we saw that put enough emphasis from a product management perspective into how we're going to go to market, how we're going to distribute the app, who are we going after, which countries are we going to launch at first, right? It has major implications on what kind of regulatory and compliance classifications you need to secure. You need to look into product pricing, localization, strategic partnerships. That is a big capability that you need to do. And then you launch and validate the MVP. So this is all the things that the product manager has to manage through, and this is the easy part. So let's see what happens if you don't have the clinical, like a well-established clinical association, and you actually need to go through a clinical trial. You cannot piggyback on somebody else's clinical papers. What do they need to do then?
Yeah, absolutely. So if there is an absence of relevant, high quality clinical evidence that supports your target indication, you need to generate your own clinical evidence. And generating clinical evidence is not a one-step process. It's not even a one clinical trial process. Typically, companies that are developing SAMD de novo through the de novo pathway. So that means there is no predicate device, and that where there isn't any evidence supporting the intervention that they're trying to get through the FDA, for example, you need to conduct multiple clinical trials over several years. And so because this is a multi-year, multi-million-dollar endeavor, you'll need stakeholder alignment and approval from your internal boards. So large organizations usually have medical affairs boards, and you need their approval before you can begin your clinical trial. That being said, this isn't a one-way street, and we want to emphasize that the difference between waterfall and agile product management is you really need internal alignment. And so that means developers aren't working in isolation. Developers are in the same room with regulatory affairs specialists, the medical affairs officers, for example, physicians, practitioners, all the different experts across disciplines need to be in the room when you're developing a product. And the Canadian Drug and Health Technology Agency has a diagram for how to develop software for medical applications. And they show planning and then review or requirement gathering through research. And then they go through regulatory approval, and then they have delivery, which is waterfall in a nutshell. And so what really needs to happen is you can't ideate and come up with your MVP or POC and then start building it and then wait for your internal regulatory approval and then move on to launching it. That's not how it works. So you need to work together with the regulatory specialists in your own organization to figure out what are the requirements, what are the compliance requirements that we need to build into our software as we're building it. So that could inform your software architecture, for example, so that you're actually compliant by design. And that's what we mean by compliance by design. And so next, let's say you've gotten your approval and you want to start your gathering clinical evidence. You could conduct a clinical trial, in which case you would need to prepare a study protocol. You would need to find your investigators who will partner with you, who have access to patients. And then you prepare a clinical trial application. You submit that to regulators such as Health Canada or FDA. And then you get research ethics board approval, and then you can start your clinical trial. An alternative to clinical trials, which is very heavily regulated, is to conduct a non-interventional observational study. And so what I mean by that is, let's say you want to develop intervention for major depressive disorder. And instead of, or something that diagnoses major depressive disorder using your phone, for example. So let's say you want to develop an app that uses your GPS data or sentiment analysis of your texts, or how often you check your phone or message or call your friends, to be able to diagnose depression without having to answer questionnaires. Instead of launching a clinical trial, which will take at least a year to develop your study protocol, submit to regulatory approval, and get research ethics board approval, you could instead reach out and partner with clinics or primary care providers, for example, or psychiatrists that have access to patients, and say, hey, look, you're using this diagnostic paper-based form to diagnose depression, and there are these limitations. And so we're working on this app. And so you offer to grant access to these patients to say, in addition to your routine clinical practice and whatever you're doing, and best practices that you're following and the care you're providing, you can use this app, and we think it's going to help you better manage your patients and detect depressive symptoms, for example, and see if they're getting worse before their next appointment. We'll give you this for free, and how about you try it out? And so that is actually viewed not as a clinical trial, but as an observational study, because it's in addition to routine care. And so as long as the physician agrees that this is okay and there's no additional risk or harm to patients, all you need to do is prepare a study protocol and submit for research ethics board approval. And they'll let you know if this is actually a clinical trial or if this is an observational study, and you're good to go. And then you can go and study, give that to patients, and actually start collecting data from real patients without having to go through the clinical trial process. And so
But
once
again,
sorry,
but just to add to it, but again, this is all about collecting the data. So you are not giving any kind of advice based on the data you have collected. So that still lies with the healthcare provider. So that's like, you can basically passively be there in the background.
Yeah. So it's kind of like if I were a patient and I use an app that is already available for free to track, I don't know, my healthcare statistics and stuff, that's actually not regulated. The doctor didn't prescribe it to me. It's just I chose to use it, and it's in addition to routine clinical practice. It's not supplanting it, and that's the key part. And so once you've generated clinical evidence, before you go to that, before you expend all of your capital on your first study, you should start with a smaller proof of concept study to test your POC, to test your hypothesis, and then gradually and incrementally move to larger and larger clinical studies. And so your first study should never be like a phase 3 clinical trial with 100 participants. It should be a smaller feasibility study. And then as you generate clinical evidence, you can go back to refining your MVP and scoping it, and validating your idea, and then keep building, refining, and testing and measuring until you have enough to actually build your MVP and secure or obtain regulatory approval and so on. And then I guess if there aren't any questions, I'll pass it back to Kitty.
Just on that, we just literally published an article on clinical validation roadmap for clinical trials for SMT. If you want, there's a lot more information and nitty-gritty information and links in that article. So if you want to have a look at it, you can find it on our website, or when we share this with you, you can just click on here and have a look at it.
Yeah, I do have a quick question, if I could. This is Dave.
Yeah, sure.
Your roadmap shows that the FDA say is going to approve off of the MVP, right? That's the product they're going to approve. Yes, but that product was not used to collect data, wasn't used to develop, wasn't used in clinical trials. The very early version of that, right? Prototype or proof of concept. So it
Yeah.
seems to me that that would raise a concern with the FDA. Wait a minute, you developed your data on one product, but you're asking me to prove something else. So could you kind of walk through how they think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of the iterative process of building, measuring, and testing is that it's not just, we should have really drawn a circle here because it's not a one-way street. And so after, you don't go back to scoping your MVP and then regulatory approval, you actually build your MVP and then you go back and test, and then you generate clinical evidence. And so that's what we mean by getting clinical validation or regulatory traction. And so you're working towards generating sufficient clinical evidence for the FDA, for example, to approve your SAMD. So it doesn't end at scoping and then building and then getting approval. It actually keeps going back at like a flywheel. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Exactly. And also think about it, like after you have, an MVP on the market, every time you add a new feature to it, you have to look at it. Is this feature something that might has to go through again the whole clinical approval, right? Is it something that is this feature something that maybe if your application is classified as classification 1, is it something that potentially puts it to be have to be qualified for classification 2? Do you need to change classification levels? Then you have to go through that entire cycle again. And that's why it's super important that when you're building your MVP and you're building your code, you actually have compliance built in there. So you can just like compartmentalize that part and apply with that for the new approval, and you don't have to basically bombard your entire code with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I have one more if I could.
Sure.
When would the QMS stuff start? Do you start, when you have to start building out your quality management system in your chart?
Yeah, so that's really okay. So I'm not sure. Are you here, William?
I think William had to drop.
Okay, if you had, okay, then I'll take it. So usually large organizations already have a quality management system. So that's something that you need to adhere to. And then you need to look at what kind of, validation are you going after? And that's something that you have to kind of navigate within the internal QMS systems. But what we always say is that try to do that as early as possible, right? So already having a look at what you have in your organization, when you're even just scoping out the product, but actually having, the quality assurance people and, regulatory people from your organizations, and also whichever advisor you're working with, part of your, not after your scoping, part of your development process. So this is something that we really do in an ongoing way. And there are a bunch of ways to improve that. I know that, for some of the large pharmaceuticals, we have automated some of the, some of the codes that, from Gyro basically created automated codes that were compliant with the pharmaceuticals quality management system, immediately kind of got it added to the documentation that needed to be delivered to the FDA. So there are a bunch of ways you can be smart about it, but we always suggest to do that as early on and as really part of your development process, other than doing it at the very end, because you won't be remembering after 4 months, 6 months of development, what you have done and which codes are, have to be sent, for approval and not.
Yeah, and we have a colleague who's an expert in Agile quality management systems. And so if there's enough interest or if you have any specific questions, we can certainly connect you to our colleague. But one of our subsequent meetups, I think we'll have on Agile quality management systems or some overarching theme like that.
Thank you.
No worries.
I wanted to add that we had a question here in the meetup channel about FDA breakthrough devices. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert in that, but we also have another colleague who has gone through that before and can speak more detailed to that. And so I can connect you I think you're here, Kevin, to him as well. But briefly, he wanted me to mention that that it's a precursor designation that you can apply to be granted by the FDA for new devices that support fatal disease or incurable diseases that are debilitating. And there are a number of considerations to qualify for the program, but the most important thing is that getting qualified will lead to getting FDA support for the regulatory approval pathway for the device. So they'll assist in, they'll participate in discussions and review clinical protocols and so on. And the key to the breakthrough device program is that it's it has to be potentially more effective than whatever is available today. And so you don't need full clinical data to support the claim. Literature review or bench or animal study data will also work. That's what he said briefly in my question to him. But it's another reason why you shouldn't wait until the very end to talk to regulators. And so you should initiate a conversation with them early on and build rapport with them. And so once you're building and validating and getting traction, this shouldn't be done in silo within your organization. You should actually have a conversation. Drug companies do this when they develop drugs, and medical device companies do this when they develop medical devices as well. And so the breakthrough pathway, for example, is like one reason why you should reach out to your regulators before you start to develop your device. But there are other benefits too.
Absolutely. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I just really wanted to kind of continue just this flow. So we kind of finish until the growth part. So let's say you have gone through all that and you have launched an MVP. Now there is another very important phase that is often skipped by organization, and that is optimizing your product regulatory market fit. And I know, what usually happens is that organizations go into this feature delivery mode, like, hey, we launched something now, what kind of new features we're gonna develop, and what we always say that, like, stop for a second and first see how people are interacting with your product and really evaluate it. So obviously try to acquire more and more customers. And that's really where, again, from a product management perspective, product marketing and growth hacking comes into play. And then you have to evaluate the MVP, and you have to evaluate it from multiple facets, like what is the user population? Could I attract enough people? How happy the people that I attracted with the application. Also, what's the product stickiness? And what I mean by that is, like, I don't care how many people downloaded your app in an app store, how many people are keep coming back and using it, right? Or how many, what's the channel performance is like, in the different channels, what are the product and usage metrics, how people actually behaviorally interact with your product, what are the features that they use, what are their flows within the product, and there are a bunch of plugins that you can, add to the product to be able to measure those. And just like understand like your marketing efforts and the cash flow and the business case, is that going towards the direction that you put together earlier on. And then you have to optimize it. And that's a very important part that, again, it's a whole new capability that is very, very new to, I think, non-digital native companies. And that is, how to run experiments and really how to run product design and marketing experiments. If I change the UX here a little bit, would that increase, usage? If I add a slightly changed version of this feature, or I take something away to just make it easier or simpler, does that improve stickiness of the product? You can use a bunch of marketing experiments as well. If I talk to the product in this or that way, or position it slightly differently, do I attract more people? So you really need to run a bunch of experiments and A/B testing, etc. as well, just to make sure that you're truly what you have, you keep on turning the little knots and optimizing it. And a bunch of experiments you run will actually leave you worse or will not effective, but that's good. Just like you need to do that. You need to learn what's actually working and what you haven't worked. And it doesn't matter how much upfront work you have done. you will never get it 100% right in the beginning. So, that will lead you to an optimized MVP. And obviously, next to all that work, you need to start to actually provide ongoing support for, customer support, bug fixes, product iterations, like some smaller ones. And then you get into the growth phase where you need to think about, am I going to add new features? If I add new features, which ones? Why? What's their benefit hypothesis? Does that mean I have to go for a new regulatory classification, right? You also need to look at product marketing. How do I grow it? How do I enter new markets? Or how do I extend to broader user groups, right? How can I attach new business models? How can I extend my network, partnerships? Can I start to partner with physicians or, healthcare providers? Or can I put my app into a, I don't know, like a hospital? Or, what is your distribution strategy? Also, usually there are a bunch of processes that will need to happen in order to be able to, fuel the app with content and just, manage the day-to-day activities. How do you professionalize those operational processes? How do you automate processes? And then that's when you can start thinking about also like, okay, how can I leverage new technologies? How can I start making the code smarter? Can I start to use AI or machine learning, creating better insights? So there's a lot of different ways to grow and different directions to grow to, and that will be the product manager's job to truly look at all those venues and make the right bets, and also to execute them well and know when to stop and know when to pivot and know when to call it a loss and choose for another one, and when to follow through. And you want to make sure that you grow sustainably, so you don't grow too fast. That's just as deadly as if you don't grow enough. So it's a very, very interesting role and game that you need to play here. Also might be a very expensive game, but you need to keep on growing the product, because right now in the digital world, if you put out a product and actually you don't add new features, etc., and you don't add something else all the time to the users, they are going to leave you. That's just what they are used to in all the other facets of their lives. So what they expect kind of the same from their health products as well. So that's what we have about the process. Again, this is not fully exhaustive, but these are what we think are the major steps. But again, the key is that a lot of these things need to happen over and over again in an agile, iterative fashion. And a lot of these things will also happen quite simultaneously, so not so clearly after each other. But just try to pay attention on, not doing the same mistakes as most organizations do. Are there any other questions?
I wanted to say thank you. This is very helpful. It reminds me of taking lean business. Also, there's a Harvard Innovating in Healthcare that's very helpful as well. My name is Kevin Kocek. I'm the CEO of Chemical Q Device, which is basically quantum technologies and neuroimaging. I like I've never seen anything like this. This is quite interesting. I'm a mentor and a judge at a university, and then it's kind of helping the students. So this will help me kind of structure and organize as compared to being out in industry.
Oh, fantastic. Listen, we will send you the link. It's right there. Use it. Again, we also have our knowledge hub, so whatever you find, use it. And if you need any time, any support to come and maybe do a talk for your students, we are very happy to help with that as well, in whichever topic related to SAMD you would like to have.
Awesome, I appreciate it.
No worries. Unfortunately, today we don't have time. We actually brought you some actual kind of exercises to do with you, like, you know, what would you do if you're a product manager and you need to optimize for speed, or, you know, you have to optimize for minimizing regulatory requirements or leveraging existing clinical evidence. So we have some exercises in there. We also have a kind of like, you know, an interaction, like, you know, another exercise for demystifying product management. Is that a myth? Is that a fact? We kind of prepare those as well. But just to make sure, you know, if it's not like a very proactive community that, you know, we can get you involved. But I absolutely love that we didn't have time for that, because there were questions and there were, you know, some sharing from your end as well. So thank you very much for being proactive and, you know, truly being present.
Is that for me? Yeah, again, I appreciate it. This is one of those things that doesn't happen too often on Meetup, a highly technical presentation, which is much needed. My stuff is, I'm doing brain organoids and quantum advancements this Thursday. I host once a week. So again, you can save a lot of people a lot of time, because what we're going to talk about at the university is ideation, and the whole goal with startups is leaving ideation and actually, you know, getting to MVPs and these types of things. But the stepwise thing, and it sounds like there's a fair amount of experience coming from you as far as you've seen other companies go through this process, and because you kept mentioning companies didn't make it here.
Yeah, so we work with a lot of healthcare companies. So, you know, like, so we do help, you know, all organizations walk through this. And sometimes they come to us like, hey, we built something and it's not compliant, help us. Sometimes they are like, hey, we have this amazing idea, you know, how much does it cost to build? Can you build it for us? Sometimes we are there to advise on, you know, the strategy that they are taking, or they don't know how to go to market with it, or, you know, so we are really there to throughout the whole process. Sometimes we do it the whole thing. Sometimes we do bits and pieces. So we really do that with a lot of organizations. So we've seen that so many times. A lot of times, you know, in non-health, you know, clients, which is interesting to see, you know, like what are the other, I don't know, what are the you know, the challenges of, for example, a financial industry launching new digital products. And then, you know, we did that with a lot of health clients as well. So we definitely have a vast experience in this. And also we can benchmark, you know, what are the very specific challenges in SEMD compared to other markets.
Now, kind of going through, do you see a lot of companies, they say you have to pivot a couple times? Now my quantum stuff has remained the same. I host the Southern California Quantum Computing discussion, but the medical stuff, I have a provisional patent. I switched to another thing, and now I'm in neuroscience, and it seems like it's working a lot better. How many times do companies typically pivot to the point where they actually find something that works?
I think it's really depending on whether or not it's a company that is established, you know, for a long time. So if we work with, you know, a company that has been in a diabetes care market over 15 years, you know, like they really know the market. So they really usually have a much better feeling with their customers and the needs and what do they want. And it's just more a question of a capability of you know, what can we build, what do we have a budget for, you know, what can we scope out, what's part of our organizational strategy, right? And then how medical devices become a part of it. If it's more of a startup that somebody is just, you know, wanting to go in there, or it's truly a one product company, you know, that you see a lot more deviations there, because then basically you need to hustle for, you know, finding the traction very early on, getting investor money. You know, you don't have per se that large distribution, you know, network at your disposal, or you don't have the partnerships there so in place. So, you know, that's something that you might be, you know, you see that there is a little bit more creative entrepreneurship there, you know, it's a little bit more hustling that requires maybe more pivoting, because you go after the opportunity. At large organizations, they are more like, hey, we have a lot more at our disposal. This is the plan, we will follow up through that. sometimes that's an advantage, sometimes that's a disadvantage, right? We also see sometimes larger organizations are like, hey, I already put €1 million in there, we're gonna do it, even though the early traction that is not there. There are, so we do see that kind of mindset as well. So it's just truly, and that's why we really started out with like how you want to do product management, what are those basic principles that you need to have, and that mindset to really make sure that you, wherever you start, you will end up with a product that has a true product regulatory market fit.
Okay, one last question is, you mentioned sometimes what happens is the startups or whoever companies, they'll get the funding, but the product's not right, or they say they skipped a step.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that because it seems like in San Diego, it's just so competitive with everything. And it's just like, what I was once told at a tech coffee is basically, you'll get funding when you're ready. It's not when you need money. It's not when, a variety of other things. So I really try to focus on having the material right.
Yeah. And I think that's something that you should do, but my personal experience, and it might sound a little bit harsh, there are a lot of organizations that, like startups or, people who have like a fascinating network that raise money and they're just not ready. It's really about your network. Like I have seen organizations, I was like, how could you, like your stats are not right. You have a great idea, but it's not enough, like your conversion rate is terrible, or, and I was like, how did you raise, like 2-3 million euros or dollars? Like, I have no idea, they just had a great network, they had a great sales pitch, they just could find the right people. So, I don't think you always get it when you have everything perfect. And I have seen people that were like the tech was there, etc., but they just couldn't sell the idea properly. And that's why we put very much emphasis on traction. Like you need to show traction. You need to, show traction at the, when you validate the idea, you need to show traction with your POC, with your, like you constantly have to talk to customers, because if you can show that people want this, there is not better sales pitch than that, and that's the most important thing. Like it's not about the idea, it's about actually showing that somebody other than yourself care about the product.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. You see a lot of people are dropping off. Listen, again, thank you very much for coming today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. We will also send you the recording. We will send you the mural link so you can have a look at it, take it. It's, it's yours, borrow it. And again, if anybody has any questions, please let us know. And in about a month again, I think we are going to organize the next meetup. And I think we're going to be focusing on that building of the MVP and compliance by design. And, just how do you actually do that? Because that's what we know the best, right? Like we are a software engineering company that happens to make software in a regulated market. So we're going to try to share our knowledge in there. And how do we do that? And what are the stuff that we have learned?
Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you all. Have a lovely day.